Good evening, survivors. This is Alex Reed, your voice amidst the chaos, broadcasting live from Station 103.7. Tonight, we venture into the depths of fear, desperation, and a fight for survival. A story of a place once bustling with life. Families out for a weekend stroll, children darting from one store to the next, shoppers carrying bags filled with gifts and gadgets. That place, once a shining beacon of modern convenience, now lies trapped in darkness and terror. Tonight I bring you the story of a shopping mall that's become a fortress of despair. What was once a haven for consumers is now overrun by the infected, a glittering maze of glass and steel hiding both horror and hope. It all began as an ordinary Saturday afternoon. The mall was alive with the buzz of weekend activity, laughter echoing from the food court, holiday music spilling out from the speakers above, and the smell of fresh pretzels wafting through the air. Parents held their children's hands, teenagers gathered in cliques, and couples wandered arm in arm, enjoying a rare day off together. It was perfect, too perfect, because what came next shattered that perfection in an instant. A single scream cut through the holiday cheer. Heads turned and time seemed to slow. In the center of a bustling store, a man collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. Shoppers nearby instinctively stepped back, unsure of what they were witnessing. Security was called, and for a brief moment, it seemed like an isolated medical emergency. But then, he rose again. His eyes, once full of life, were now hollow and sunken. His skin, a ghastly pale, stretched tightly over his frame. He moved unnaturally, jerky, deliberate, as if driven by something no longer human. The infected had arrived, and the nightmare had begun. Panic spread faster than the infection itself. Shoppers scrambled for the exits, but more infected poured in from the main entrance. The food court became a war zone as tables were overturned in desperate attempts to create makeshift barricades. Security guards tried in vain to maintain order, their voices drowned out by the cacophony of fear. And amid the chaos, families were torn apart, parents separated from their children, friends losing sight of each other in the frantic rush for safety. As the infection spread throughout the mall, survivors found themselves trapped, cut off from the outside world. Stores became impromptu shelters with frightened shoppers barricading themselves inside using whatever they could find. Clothing racks, mannequins, display shelves. Some huddled together in silence, praying for rescue. Others tried to fight back, arming themselves with whatever they could grab. Kitchen knives from a home goods store, bats from a sporting goods section. In those early moments, no one knew how far the infection had spread. People outside the mall gathered in growing numbers, anxiously awaiting news of loved ones trapped inside. Officials struggled to understand what was happening, while the first responders were overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the outbreak. Rumors began to circulate about military involvement, about quarantines and containment zones. But for those trapped inside, there was no time for speculation. Every second was a battle for survival. Among the survivors were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. A store manager thrust into a leadership role he never asked for, now coordinating efforts to keep his group alive. A teenager trapped while out with friends, desperately searching for a younger sibling lost in the chaos. A security guard, familiar with the layout of the mall, stepping up as a strategist to guide others through the labyrinthine corridors. And a couple caught in the middle of the outbreak, grappling not only with the horrors around them, but also with their own crumbling relationship. Each of them faced impossible choices. Should they stay barricaded in the relative safety of the stores, or risk venturing out into the unknown to find supplies or loved ones? Should they trust strangers who might pose just as much of a threat as the infected? And with every passing minute, the infected grew bolder, smashing through glass storefronts and clawing at hastily erected barricades. The mall, once a symbol of consumerism and comfort, had become a prison, a cold, glittering maze where the line between life and death was razor thin. Outside, the scene was no less dire. Families held vigils near the mall's entrances, holding up pictures of loved ones trapped inside. They lit candles, whispered prayers, and clung to each other as the hours dragged on with no sign of rescue. Local news stations broadcast live coverage showing the growing crowd of concerned citizens and the increasing presence of law enforcement and emergency vehicles. The tension was palpable, with each new update, or lack thereof, bringing more uncertainty and fear. But amid the despair, there were whispers of hope, rumors of military intervention, of specialized units preparing to breach the mall and rescue the survivors, stories of community members organizing supplies and medical aid for those who might make it out. And through it all, this broadcast will be your guide, a lifeline in the dark. Together, we'll follow their stories, witness their struggles, and learn from their choices. Survival in this world isn't just about fighting back. It's about being smart, being resourceful, and most importantly, staying human. Because in a world overrun by the undead, it's our humanity that sets us apart. Stay tuned, survivors. The story is just beginning. And if you're trapped in a similar nightmare, listen closely. You might just learn what it takes to survive. Picture a place designed to be an oasis of comfort, where bright lights reflect off polished floors and the scent of roasted coffee mingles with the fragrance of new clothes. The mall stands as a testament to modern convenience, a sprawling complex that once buzzed with life. Now, under the dim glow of emergency lighting, it has become something else entirely. A fortress, a trap, and for some, a graveyard. At the heart of the mall lies the food court, its tables overturned and chairs scattered in chaos. Just hours ago, families gathered here, sharing meals beneath twinkling lights and colorful banners. The air was filled with the sounds of clinking cutlery, cheerful chatter, and the rhythmic hum of frying machines. Now, silence reigns. The once vibrant stalls stand deserted, their counters splattered with half-eaten meals and forgotten trays. Vending machines, once a source of quick snacks, are now potential barricades, dragged to block doorways against the growing threat. Adjacent to the food court are the high-end stores, their pristine glass fronts shattered in the initial panic. Designer handbags, jewelry, and luxury clothing lie abandoned on the floor, trampled in the rush to escape. These stores, once symbols of elegance and wealth, now serve a grim purpose, hiding places for terrified survivors. Behind the display racks and under counters, people huddle, hoping the darkness will shield them from the roving infected. The mall's layout is deceptively complex. What seems like a straightforward network of corridors is, in reality, a labyrinth. Wide main hallways branch off into narrower passages lined with stores, each corridor echoing faintly with the groans of the infected. Beyond the public areas, utility corridors snake through the building, designed for employees to move unseen by shoppers. These service hallways, once bustling with workers carrying out day-to-day operations, now offer a potential lifeline for those who know the mall's secrets. Dimly lit and eerily silent, they are narrow and cramped, but they might just provide a way to move unseen by the undead. Hidden even further from view are the maintenance tunnels, long concrete corridors running beneath the mall. Originally intended for plumbing and electrical work, these tunnels now serve a darker purpose. Few know of their existence, and even fewer dare to venture into their depths. The dim yellow light from flickering bulbs barely penetrates the shadows, and the sound of dripping water echoes unnervingly through the narrow space. For those brave or desperate enough to explore them, these tunnels might lead to an escape, or they might lead to something far worse. Despite the growing terror, remnants of the mall's former glory remain. The vibrant advertisements plastered on walls still boast smiling faces and enticing offers, a haunting reminder of a world that no longer exists. Neon signs flicker intermittently, casting brief, colorful glows across the floor before plunging back into darkness. The scent of perfumes lingers faintly, in the air blending unnaturally, with the metallic tang of blood. In some places, soft music still plays from overhead speakers, a cruel contrast to the carnage below. The contrast between the mall's opulence and its current state is jarring. A place built to be a symbol of modern life, where people once gathered to shop, eat, and relax, has become a battlefield. Every luxury item, every piece of decor now serves as either an obstacle or a tool for survival. The grand atrium, with its towering glass ceiling that once allowed sunlight to stream in, now feels like a giant cage, trapping everyone inside. The sparkling floors, once carefully maintained by cleaning staff, are smeared with dirt, debris, and dark red stains. In the midst of this chaos, there are whispers of life. The survivors who remain move cautiously, using every inch of the environment to their advantage. They peek out from behind overturned tables, dart between broken storefronts, and cling to the shadows, trying to stay one step ahead of the infected. Every sound, every creak of a door, every clatter of a fallen object sends a wave of fear through those still fighting to survive. But the mall is vast, and survival means more than just hiding. Supplies are scattered across different sections, each vital for staying alive. The sporting goods store offers potential weapons, bats, golf clubs, and even knives. The pharmacy, locked behind a glass door, holds precious medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death. The convenience store, once a quick stop for snacks and drinks, now holds the promise of much-needed food and water. And then there are the clothing stores, where layers of thick fabric might serve as makeshift armor against bites. Yet, for all its potential, the mall is also fraught with dangers. The infected roam freely, their numbers increasing with each passing hour. They move clumsily but relentlessly, drawn to any sign of movement or sound. The wide open spaces of the mall, once an inviting feature, now feel like death traps, offering little cover from the advancing hordes. There's also the threat of collapse. With fires breaking out in various parts of the mall and structural damage from the initial outbreak, sections of the building are no longer safe. Ceilings sag ominously, walls show cracks, and the air grows thick with smoke in certain areas. Navigating this treacherous environment requires more than just courage. It requires strategy, quick thinking, and a bit of luck. This is the new reality inside the mall. A place once defined by luxury and leisure has become a battleground for survival. Every corner hides a potential threat. Every sound could be the last thing a survivor hears. Yet, amid the darkness, hope flickers. Survivors cling to the possibility of rescue, to the belief that if they can just hold out a little longer, help will come. And so, they press on, navigating the eerie maze of glass and steel, determined to live another day. In the sprawling chaos of the mall, a few survivors begin to stand out, not because they sought leadership or attention, but because the situation forced it upon them. Ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, each struggling to navigate the impossible. Among them is Daniel Lewis, the store manager of an upscale electronics outlet. Daniel has spent years working here, managing everything from difficult customers to last-minute holiday rushes. He's always been reliable, known for keeping a cool head under pressure. But this is beyond anything he's ever faced. Standing behind a barricade hastily constructed from display cases, Daniel feels the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The group of survivors huddled in the store looks to him for guidance. Most of them are too scared to speak, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell them what to do. Daniel didn't ask to be a leader, but now leadership has found him. His mind races as he tries to recall the layout of the mall, searching for possible escape routes or safe zones. He knows the service hallways might offer some protection, but they're narrow, and if the infected get in, There's no way out. Every decision feels like a gamble, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Not far from Daniel's group is Mia, a 16-year-old who came to the mall with her friends to hang out. What was supposed to be a fun afternoon of shopping and grabbing smoothies turned into a nightmare she never could have imagined. Now separated from her friends and completely alone, Mia clutches her phone tightly, its battery almost dead. Her only thought is finding her younger brother, who'd been at the arcade when the chaos began. Mia's heart pounds as she moves cautiously through the mall, sticking to the shadows. She knows the infected react to sound and movement, so every step is measured, every breath shallow. Despite the terror gripping her, she forces herself to stay focused. If she's going to survive, she can't afford to freeze up. She has to find her brother. That's all that matters now. Meanwhile, over by the security office, Frank Ramirez, a veteran security guard, takes stock of the situation. Frank served in the military years ago, before taking this job. He knows the mall inside and out, the layout, the blind spots, even the hidden maintenance tunnels that few others are aware of. His training kicks in automatically, assessing threats and formulating plans. Frank moves with purpose, his flashlight casting long shadows across the deserted corridor. He's already tried the radio, but communication with the outside world seems impossible for now. Still, he's not giving up. His priority is to locate other survivors and lead them to safety. If anyone can navigate this maze of terror, it's him. Across the mall in a high-end clothing store, Lisa and Mark, a young couple, crouch behind a counter. Lisa grips Mark's hand tightly, her mind racing with fear. They had come to the mall for a casual shopping trip, unaware that it would turn into a fight for their lives. Mark, trying to stay calm, whispers reassurances. But even he isn't sure they'll make it out of this alive. The tension between them is palpable. This crisis has brought out cracks in their relationship. Fears, doubts, and unspoken frustrations surfacing in the worst possible moment. As they hear the distant groans of the infected, they know they'll have to make a decision soon. Stay hidden and hope for rescue, or risk venturing out to find safety. Neither option feels particularly hopeful, but doing nothing isn't an option either. The outbreak itself began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was a scene so mundane, it could have gone unnoticed. A shopper in a mid-range clothing store began to cough violently. Other shoppers glanced over but quickly returned to browsing the racks, assuming it was nothing serious. But then the man staggered, knocking over a rack of clothes. His skin turned a sickly pale, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Before anyone could react, he collapsed. A store clerk rushed to his side, calling for help. Others gathered around, concerned but unaware of the real danger. The man on the floor began to convulse, his body jerking unnaturally. And then, as if pulled by invisible strings, he rose again, this time with an inhuman growl escaping his lips. His eyes, once filled with fear and confusion, now held only hunger. The first attack happened in a blur. The infected man lunged at the nearest person, biting down hard before anyone could stop him. Screams erupted, and panic spread like wildfire. People ran in every direction, colliding with one another in their frantic attempts to escape. Security guards tried to intervene, but they were unprepared for what they were dealing with. Within minutes, the infection had spread. Those who had been bitten began to exhibit the same symptoms: violent coughing, convulsions, and then the transformation. The mall, once a place of comfort and leisure, descended into chaos. Shoppers trampled over one another in their desperation to flee, but escape was almost impossible. The sheer number of people created a bottleneck at every exit, trapping many inside. Frank, the security guard, tried to maintain order. He shouted commands into his radio, directing other guards to assist in evacuating the crowd. But it was no use. The infected were everywhere, and their numbers were growing rapidly. Frank knew that if they didn't act fast, the entire mall would be overrun. Meanwhile, Daniel, the store manager, did what he could to help those in his store. He locked the doors and used shelves to barricade the entrance, trying to buy them some time. He didn't know how long it would hold, but it was better than nothing. He glanced around at the terrified faces of his customers, realizing that they were now his responsibility. Mia, still searching for her brother, witnessed the chaos unfold from a distance. She watched in horror as people were attacked and bitten, their screams echoing through the hallways. She wanted to run, to hide, but she couldn't leave without her brother. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to move forward, her heart pounding in her chest. As the infected continued to spread, the mall became a war zone. Barricades were hastily constructed, survivors gathered in small groups, and the once vibrant atmosphere was replaced by fear and desperation. It was clear to everyone inside that this was no ordinary crisis. This was something far worse, and if they wanted to survive, they would need to work together, think fast, and hope that help would come before it was too late. Survival in a world collapsing around you doesn't just demand bravery. It demands decisions. Decisions made under pressure, fueled by fear, hope, and sometimes regret. Inside the mall, chaos had given way to an uneasy quiet. The infected roamed in the distance, their guttural groans echoing faintly through the dimly lit corridors. Among the scattered groups of survivors, 4 individuals stood out, each grappling with their own inner turmoil. Daniel paced nervously behind the barricaded storefront, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. He wasn't a hero, nor did he want to be. He was just a store manager who had always followed the rules, met his sales targets, and clocked out at the end of the day like everyone else. But today, everything was different. Today, he wasn't just a manager. He was the only one standing between a group of terrified people and the undead lurking beyond the glass doors. "I don't know how long these barricades will hold," he muttered under his breath, glancing at the makeshift defenses they had hastily put together, using metal shelves and mannequins. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped a crowbar. His only weapon. A woman with a small child approached him, her voice shaky. Do you think help is coming soon?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to offer some reassurance, but he didn't have an answer. Instead, he forced a weak smile and nodded. "We just have to stay calm and stick together." But deep down, Daniel was struggling. He questioned every decision he made. Should they stay put and fortify their position, or should they try to move toward the service corridors where they might find an exit? Every choice seemed fraught with danger, and every wrong move could cost lives. The weight of responsibility bore down on him, but there was no time to dwell on self-doubt. People were counting on him. Daniel took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. Leadership wasn't about knowing all the answers. It was about keeping people together in the face of uncertainty. And so, despite the fear gnawing at his insides, he took charge. Across the mall, Mia crept through a dimly lit corridor, her eyes scanning every shadow for movement. The only sound she could hear was the rapid thudding of her own heart. She clutched a metal rod she had picked up from a broken display rack, gripping it tightly as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her thoughts were consumed by a single goal, finding her younger brother. He had been at the arcade when the outbreak started, and she hadn't seen him since. Every second that passed without finding him felt like a lifetime. Fear tried to take hold of her, fear that he was already gone, that she was too late, but she couldn't afford to think like that. She had to keep going. As she turned a corner, she spotted a group of infected shuffling in the distance. She froze, holding her breath. Slowly she backed away, careful not to make a sound. The last thing she wanted was to draw their attention. Once she was safely out of sight, she leaned against a wall, trying to calm her racing heart. Mia had always thought of herself as just an ordinary teenager, someone who worried about exams, hung out with friends, and spent too much time on her phone. But now, none of that mattered. In a matter of hours, she had been thrust into a world where survival meant being smart, being brave, and sometimes taking risks that could cost her everything. "I'll find you," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. "I won't leave without you." Huddled behind a counter in a high-end clothing store, Lisa and Mark whispered in tense voices, their argument barely concealed by the darkness around them. "We can't just sit here forever," Mark insisted, his voice low but urgent. "We need to move. If we stay here, we're trapped. And if we go out there, we'll get ourselves killed." Lisa shot back, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you even know where we're going? What if we walk right into a horde?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "We can't wait for rescue, Lisa. No one's coming. We have to do something." Lisa glanced toward the barricaded entrance. The faint sounds of the infected drifting in from the mall's main corridor. She knew Mark had a point, but the idea of venturing out into the unknown terrified her. They had already seen what happened to those who were caught by the infected. The memory of the screams still haunted her. Their relationship had always had its ups and downs, but this situation had brought every issue they had to the surface. Fear, stress, and uncertainty created a volatile mix. Yet, despite the tension between them, they knew they needed each other. They couldn't survive alone. "Fine," Lisa said finally, her voice trembling. "But we need a plan. We can't just run out there blind." Mark nodded, relieved that she was willing to move forward. "We'll stick to the service corridors. They're narrow, but it's better than being out in the open." As they prepared to move, neither of them voiced what they both feared, that their relationship might not survive this ordeal, even if they did. In the security office, Frank Ramirez sat at a desk, his eyes scanning the row of monitors that still worked. Most of the cameras had gone offline, but a few continued to provide grainy, flickering images of the mall's interior. He noted the movements of the infected, trying to map out a safe route for any survivors who might still be moving through the building. Frank wasn't new to high-stress situations. His years in the military had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, how to assess risks, and make tough decisions. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield with clear objectives and a chain of command. This was chaos, pure and simple. He leaned back in his chair, memories of his past flashing through his mind. He had seen friends lost in combat, had made decisions that haunted him for years. Now, he found himself in a similar position, responsible for the lives of people he barely knew, trying to guide them through a situation where one wrong move could mean death. Frank picked up his radio, adjusting the frequency. He had been trying to contact anyone outside the mall for hours, but all he got was static. Still, he didn't give up. He knew that perseverance was key in situations like this. If he could just hold on a little longer, maybe help would come. Until then, he would do what he could. He would strategize, guide, and protect. It was the only way he knew how to survive. As the hours dragged on inside the mall, fear continued to grip those trapped within. Meanwhile, outside, a different kind of tension filled the air. Families, friends, and concerned onlookers gathered near the mall's entrances, desperate for news. They formed makeshift vigils, clutching candles and photographs of their loved ones, hoping for a miracle in a situation that seemed increasingly hopeless. The media had arrived shortly after the outbreak began, setting up cameras and broadcasting live coverage of the unfolding crisis. News anchors, speaking in hurried, somber tones, described the scene for viewers at home. Crowds stood behind barricades set up by law enforcement, their eyes fixed on the mall's towering facade, now eerily silent except for the occasional distant sounds of chaos from within. A woman in her 40s stood near the barricades, holding a picture of her teenage daughter, who had gone to the mall earlier that day. Her eyes were red from crying, but she refused to leave, clinging to the hope that her child was still alive. Around her, other families shared similar stories. Sons, daughters, spouses, and friends who had gone in and never come out. "I just want to know if she's okay," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "She's all I have." Nearby, a man in a paramedic's uniform helped organize the growing crowd. Despite the chaos, a sense of community was beginning to emerge. People shared supplies, water, blankets, and snacks, while others offered words of comfort. Although none of them could do anything to change what was happening inside, they clung to the idea that they could at least be there for each other. This is Alex Reed, broadcasting live from Station 103.7. For those of you still trapped inside, stay strong. Help is on the way, at least that's what we've been told. In the meantime, stick together, stay quiet, and move only when necessary. And if you can hear me, I've got a few tips that might just keep you alive. Daniel, the store manager, paused as the broadcast continued. He adjusted the radio's volume, ensuring that everyone in his group could hear. "First things first," Alex continued, his voice clear despite the static. "Avoid the escalators at all costs. They're too exposed, and you'll be an easy target. If you need to move between floors, stick to the back hallways or service elevators. They're narrow, but they'll give you some cover." Daniel exchanged a glance with one of the older men in the group, nodding slightly. The advice made sense. They had considered using the escalators earlier, but something about it felt too risky. Now, with confirmation from someone on the outside, they knew they had made the right call. "Next," Alex said, "if you're holed up somewhere, make sure to reinforce your barricades. Use anything you can find, tables, chairs, shelves, and don't just rely on locking the doors. The infected are persistent. They'll push, claw, and break through whatever's in their way. The more layers you put between you and them, the better." Lisa and Mark, still hiding in the clothing store, listened intently. Mark glanced around, eyeing the shelves and racks that they hadn't yet used to strengthen their barricade. Without a word, he stood and began moving things into place, determined to do everything he could to keep them safe. "Finally," Alex added, his voice softening slightly, "remember that you're not alone. There are other survivors out there just like you trying to make it through this. If you come across anyone who isn't infected, work together. You'll stand a better chance that way. And if you've got family waiting for you on the outside, hold on to that hope. Sometimes hope is all we've got." Mia, crouched behind a corner in one of the mall's many corridors, felt a lump rise in her throat. She thought of her brother still somewhere out there and clenched her fists. She wasn't going to give up. No matter what it took, she would find him. Back outside, Alex continued his broadcast, switching to reports he had received from the people near the mall. "We've received a few updates from local officials," he said, his tone growing more serious. "The area around the mall has been cordoned off, and authorities are urging everyone to stay away. They're working on a plan to contain the situation, but, well, let's just say that plans can change quickly in situations like this." He paused briefly before adding, "I've also heard from a few family members gathered outside. They're holding vigil, waiting for news, hoping for rescue. If you've got loved ones in there, know that they're not giving up on you. And neither are we." In the background, faint sounds of typing could be heard as Alex worked to gather more information. Despite the pressure of broadcasting during such a crisis, he remained calm and composed, knowing that his words carried weight. He wasn't just reporting, he was guiding, comforting, and in a way, fighting alongside those trapped inside. Back in the mall, Frank Ramirez had managed to lead a small group of survivors to a more secure location near the maintenance tunnels. He glanced down at his radio, grateful for Alex's broadcast. Although Frank was experienced and knew much of what had been shared, hearing another voice provided a sense of connection, a reminder that they weren't completely alone. As the group settled in, Frank took a moment to share a few of his own tips. Remember, he said, addressing the group, we're in a survival situation now. That means thinking ahead, planning every move. Don't waste supplies, water, food, even things like batteries. Everything matters. A young woman in the group, clutching a small flashlight, nodded slowly. Frank's steady demeanor gave them some hope, but they knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Outside the mall, as night fell, the crowd of onlookers grew quieter. The candles flickered in the cold evening breeze, casting a soft glow over the gathered families. Despite the uncertainty, they held on to a shared sense of determination. They didn't know what was happening inside, but they refused to leave until they knew the fate of their loved ones. Stay strong, survivors. This isn't the end. As long as you're breathing, there's a chance. And remember, we're all rooting for you out here. Keep moving. Keep fighting. And whatever you do, don't give up. Inside the mall, tension hung thick in the air. The survivors knew that staying in one place for too long was dangerous, but moving through the building was equally risky. The infected were everywhere, their groans echoing through the wide hallways and narrow corridors. Still, they couldn't sit idly by. Supplies were running low, and if they wanted to make it through the night, they needed food, water, and first aid essentials. Daniel, the reluctant leader, gathered the group inside a large department store. The store's wide floor space made it difficult to defend, but they had little choice. They needed to rest and regroup. And this was the safest option they had at the moment. All right, let's start barricading the entrances, Daniel said, trying to sound confident, despite the fear gnawing at him. He looked around at the shelves stocked with clothes, mannequins posed in fashionable outfits, and display cases filled with accessories. Use anything you can find. Shelves, racks, mannequins. We need to create as many obstacles as possible. The group moved quickly, dragging heavy shelves and stacking them near the glass entrance. Frank Ramirez, the former soldier turned security guard, took charge of reinforcing the barricade. He directed a few able-bodied survivors to help him lift mannequins and place them strategically, creating a makeshift wall that might slow the infected if they tried to break through. This should hold them for a while, Frank said, wiping sweat from his brow. But we need to be ready to move if it doesn't. Mia, the teenager still searching for her younger brother, kept glancing toward the entrance. She couldn't stop thinking about him, imagining him alone and scared somewhere in the mall. She wanted to go out and look for him, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. Daniel noticed her anxiety and walked over. You okay? Mia nodded, though the look in her eyes said otherwise. I need to find my brother. He's out there somewhere. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll find him, but we have to be smart about this. If we go out there without a plan, we're not helping anyone. Stay with us for now. When the time is right, we'll look for him together. Mia bit her lip, but nodded. She knew he was right, but it didn't make waiting any easier. As the group worked to fortify their temporary shelter, they discussed their next move. They needed supplies, and the nearest place to find them was the food court. It was risky, too open, too exposed, but they didn't have a choice. We'll need a small team, Daniel said, glancing around. A few people to go with me to the food court. The rest of you stay here and keep watch. I'll go, Frank volunteered without hesitation. I know the layout better than anyone. If things go south, I can lead us back through the service corridors. Mark, one half of the troubled couple, stepped forward. I'll go too. We need those supplies, and I can't just sit around waiting. Lisa gave him a worried look, but didn't say anything. She knew arguing would only create more tension, and they couldn't afford that right now. With the team assembled, Daniel outlined the plan. They would move quickly and quietly, avoiding open areas as much as possible. The goal was simple. Get in, grab supplies, and get out before the infected noticed them. Stick to the shadows, Frank advised. Don't engage unless you have to. If we run into trouble, fall back immediately. Everyone nodded in agreement, though the air was thick with unspoken fear. They knew the risks. One wrong move could be fatal, but they had no other option. The journey to the food court was tense. Every step felt like it echoed too loudly. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. Frank led the way, his flashlight turned off to avoid drawing attention. They moved through the deserted hallways. The eerie silence broken only by the occasional distant groan of the infected. When they finally reached the food court, they paused to take in the scene. What had once been a bustling hub filled with laughter, smells of freshly cooked meals, and the clatter of trays was now a ghostly wasteland. Tables and chairs were overturned. Food lay scattered across the floor, and the faint metallic smell of blood hung in the air. "Let's move fast," Daniel whispered, gesturing toward one of the food stalls that appeared to have untouched supplies. "We don't know how long we've got." The group split up, each person moving to a different stall to gather as much as they could. Mark grabbed bottled water from a refrigerator, stuffing as many as he could into a large bag. Frank focused on canned goods and packaged snacks, anything with a long shelf life that could be easily carried. As they worked, Mia noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Movement. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to look. A group of infected had entered the food court from the opposite end, their eyes glassy and their movements slow but deliberate. "Guys," she whispered urgently, "we've got company." Daniel looked up, his expression turning grim. "Grab what you can and move, now." The group scrambled to finish collecting supplies, the tension rising with each passing second. The infected were getting closer, their low growls growing louder as they caught sight of the survivors. "We're out of time," Frank said sharply. "Fall back, now." The group moved as quickly as they could, but the infected were faster than they had anticipated. As they reached the edge of the food court, one of the creatures let out a guttural screech, alerting the others. Within moments, more infected began pouring into the area. "Go! Go!" Daniel shouted, leading the group toward the service hallway they had used to get in. They sprinted down the hallway, the sound of the infected growing louder behind them. Frank brought up the rear, keeping a watchful eye on their pursuers. He knew they couldn't outrun the horde forever. They needed to find a defensible position. "Up ahead," Frank called out, spotting a maintenance door. "Through there." They reached the door and piled inside, slamming it shut just as the first of the infected reached it. Frank quickly locked the door and leaned against it, catching his breath. "That could have gone better," Mark said between gasps. "Yeah, but we got what we came for," Daniel replied, holding up the bag of supplies. "Let's get back to the others before things get worse." As they made their way back toward the department store, each of them knew that this was only the beginning. The infected were learning, adapting, and growing bolder. The fight for survival was far from over. Back inside the department store, tension was mounting. Those who had stayed behind were anxiously waiting for the supply team to return. Every sound, every distant groan or creak of the building set their nerves on edge. Lisa kept glancing at the entrance, her hands fidgeting as she tried to distract herself from the worst-case scenarios running through her mind. "They've been gone a while," she said, breaking the heavy silence. "They'll be back," Mia replied, her voice firm, despite her own gnawing worry. She didn't want to believe that anything could have happened to them. Not now. Not when they had barely begun to figure out how to survive. Before Lisa could respond, the door to the service hallway creaked open. Daniel, Frank, Mark, and the rest of the team stumbled in, breathing heavily, but visibly relieved. They carried bags filled with supplies, food, water, and some basic first aid items. "We made it," Daniel said, dropping the bags onto the floor. "Barely." Lisa rushed to Mark, throwing her arms around him in relief. "I thought something happened to you." We had a close call, but we're fine. Mark reassured her. Let's just be thankful we got what we needed. Frank, ever the strategist, didn't waste any time. He took a quick inventory of the supplies and began giving instructions. We need to ration everything carefully. This isn't going to last forever, and the more we can stretch it, the better. As the group settled down, the tension eased slightly, but not for long. The infected were still out there, and it was only a matter of time before they tried to breach the barricades. While the survivors were catching their breath, the infected outside the department store began to exhibit strange behavior. Unlike before, when they mindlessly wandered and reacted only to sound or movement, they now seemed more deliberate in their actions. They gathered near the barricades, clawing at the glass with an eerie persistence. One of them, a particularly large figure with torn clothing and deep bite marks across its arms, began ramming itself against the barricade. "They're learning," Frank observed grimly. He had seen similar behavior during his time in combat zones, enemies testing defenses before launching a full assault. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to hide his fear. "What do we do if they get through?" "We slow them down, buy time. If they break in, we fall back to the service hallway and make our way to the maintenance tunnels," Frank replied. His voice was calm, but the underlying tension was unmistakable. "They're not getting through," Mark added, as if saying it aloud would make it true. But even as they spoke, the infected outside continued their relentless assault. The glass storefront shuddered with each impact, cracks beginning to form in the once sturdy surface. Just as the survivors were bracing for the possibility of a breach, a sudden shrill sound filled the air. The fire alarm had been triggered. Red strobe lights flashed throughout the mall, casting an ominous glow over the scene. The alarm blared loudly, echoing through the empty halls and drawing the attention of every infected in the building. "Who triggered the alarm?" Daniel shouted over the deafening noise. "No idea," Frank replied, his eyes scanning the room. "But this is bad. Really bad." The loud, continuous noise acted like a beacon, attracting infected from every corner of the mall. They began converging toward the source of the sound, toward the department store where the survivors had taken refuge. "We can't stay here," Lisa shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "They'll be on us in minutes." Frank took charge. "Everyone, grab what you can carry. We're moving to the maintenance tunnels now. Stay close, stay quiet, and keep moving no matter what." The group moved quickly, gathering their supplies and preparing to leave. Mia clutched the metal rod she had been carrying since the outbreak began, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that if they didn't move fast, they wouldn't make it out alive. Frank led the group out of the department store and into the service hallway. The flashing red lights and the blaring alarm created a disorienting atmosphere, making it difficult to focus. They moved quickly, but carefully, trying to avoid drawing any more attention than the alarm already had. As they reached a junction in the hallway, Frank paused, checking both directions. "Left leads to the maintenance tunnels. Right goes back toward the main atrium. We stick to the left." Just as they turned to follow his lead, a guttural growl echoed from behind them. They turned. Too late. A group of infected had followed them into the hallway, moving faster than expected. The lead infected, the same large figure that had been ramming the barricade earlier, let out a deafening screech and charged toward them. "Run!" Frank shouted, raising his flashlight to temporarily blind the oncoming horde. The group sprinted down the hallway, the sound of the infected's footsteps growing louder behind them. Panic set in as they realized how quickly the creatures were closing the gap. "Up ahead!" Daniel called out, spotting the entrance to the maintenance tunnels. Frank reached the door first and yanked it open. "Inside, now!" One by one, the survivors scrambled through the doorway. Mark was the last to enter, slamming the heavy door shut just as the infected reached it. He locked the door, breathing heavily as the sounds of the infected pounding on the other side echoed through the tunnel. For a brief moment, there was silence, except for the labored breathing of the survivors. They had made it, barely, but they knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The infected were relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they found another way in. Frank turned to the group, his expression serious. "We're not out of this yet. We need to keep moving." The maintenance tunnels stretched out before them, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The air was thick and stale, carrying the faint metallic scent of rust. Every step the survivors took echoed ominously, a constant reminder of how exposed they were. Despite the relative safety of the tunnels, everyone knew that this was only a temporary respite. The infected were relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they found another way in. "We can't stay down here for long," Frank said, his voice low but firm. "These tunnels lead to the underground parking lot. If we can make it through there, we might find a way out." Daniel nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "All right, let's keep moving. Stay close and stay quiet." Mia, clutching her metal rod tightly, walked near the front of the group. Her mind was racing with thoughts of her younger brother. She hadn't seen him since the outbreak began, but she refused to believe he was gone. If they made it out of the mall, she was determined to find him, no matter what it took. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, the sound of distant groans grew louder. Frank motioned for the group to stop and listened carefully. "They're ahead of us," he said, his brow furrowing. "Sounds like they've already made it into the parking lot." Lisa's eyes widened in fear. "Then what do? We can't go back the way we came. And if they're ahead of us?" Frank glanced around, his mind working quickly to come up with a plan. "We don't have a choice. We keep moving, but we'll need to be ready for anything. If they're swarming the lot, we'll have to fight our way through." Daniel swallowed hard, but nodded. "All right, everyone, grab whatever you can use as a weapon. Stay together and don't stop for anything." Mark picked up a heavy wrench he had found earlier, gripping it tightly. Lisa clung to a fire extinguisher, her hands trembling slightly. Mia, already armed with her metal rod, steeled herself for what was to come. The group moved forward, their pace slow but determined. When they reached the entrance to the underground parking lot, the scene before them was worse than they had feared. The lot was massive, with rows of cars stretching as far as the eye could see. But it wasn't the cars that caught their attention. It was the sheer number of infected swarming the area. They moved between the vehicles, their movements erratic but purposeful, as if searching for something or someone. "We'll never make it through that," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the groaning horde. "We don't have a choice," Frank replied. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. Our best bet is to move quickly and quietly. Stick to the shadows, use the cars for cover, and avoid open spaces." The group nodded, though fear was etched on every face. With no other option, they began their daring escape attempt. Moving through the parking lot was like navigating a minefield. Every step had to be carefully measured, every sound minimized to avoid drawing attention. The infected were everywhere, their eyes glassy and their movements jerky. The survivors crouched low, using the cars as cover as they crept toward the far end of the lot where the exit was located. At one point, Mia accidentally kicked a loose piece of metal, the sound echoing through the otherwise silent lot. Several infected nearby turned their heads in unison, their eyes locking onto the group. For a moment, no one moved, their breaths caught in their throats. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the infected charged. "Go!" Frank shouted, waving the group forward. "Don't stop!" The survivors broke into a run, weaving between cars as the infected closed in behind them. Lisa, lagging slightly behind, sprayed the fire extinguisher toward the approaching horde, the thick white cloud temporarily obscuring their vision. "Keep moving," Daniel called out, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was left behind. As they neared the exit, the infected swarmed in from the sides, cutting off their path. Mark swung his wrench at an approaching figure, the heavy metal connecting with a sickening crack. Frank, using a metal pipe he had picked up earlier, fought off another attacker, his movements swift and precise. "Up ahead!" Daniel shouted, pointing toward a stairwell that led to the surface. "We can make it if we move now." The group pushed forward, their adrenaline fueling their desperate escape. One by one, they reached the stairwell, Frank holding the door open as the others rushed through. Just as Mia reached the entrance, she heard a faint, familiar voice calling out from nearby. "Help! Someone!" She froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was her brother's voice. She was sure of it. "Mia, come on!" Daniel shouted from the stairwell, but she didn't move. She couldn't. "He's out there," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't leave him." Frank, seeing the panic in her eyes, stepped forward. "We'll find him, Mia, but not like this. If we stay here, none of us will make it." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she knew he was right. Reluctantly, she turned and followed the others up the stairs, her heart aching with the fear that she might never see her brother again. Once they reached the surface, the group found themselves on the mall's rooftop. The cold night air hit them, offering a brief moment of relief from the stifling tension below. But they weren't safe yet. "We need to signal for help," Frank said, scanning the area. "If we can get the attention of someone outside, we might have a chance." Daniel pointed toward a large antenna near the edge of the roof. "What about that? Can we use it to send a signal?" Frank nodded. "It's worth a try. Let's move." As they made their way across the roof, a new threat emerged. Several infected had followed them up the stairwell, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the dim light. The survivors didn't hesitate. They fought back with everything they had. Lisa used her fire extinguisher to create a barrier of thick foam, slowing the infected's advance. Mark swung his wrench with all his strength, while Frank led a smaller group to the antenna, working quickly to set up a signal. "Mia, help me with this," Frank called out as he connected wires and adjusted the frequency. Despite the chaos, Mia focused on the task, her hands steady as she worked alongside Frank. She didn't know if the signal would reach anyone, but it was their only hope. With the infected steadily advancing across the rooftop, the survivors worked frantically to set up a signal. Frank barked out instructions as he connected wires and adjusted the frequency on the old communication device attached to the rooftop antenna. His military experience told him that if they could broadcast on an emergency frequency, there was a slim chance someone would hear them. Almost there, Frank shouted over the noise, his voice strained with urgency. "Just keep them off us for a few more minutes." Daniel, Mark, and Lisa formed a defensive line near the stairwell entrance. Mark swung his wrench with desperate strength, knocking back any infected that got too close. Lisa used her fire extinguisher to create barriers of thick foam, temporarily blinding the infected. Despite the terror, they worked in sync, knowing that their lives depended on holding the line. "We can't keep this up much longer," Lisa cried, her voice trembling. "We don't have to," Daniel replied. "We just need to buy Frank enough time." As the infected pressed forward, the situation grew increasingly dire. Despite their best efforts, the barricade near the stairwell began to buckle under the relentless assault. One of the infected, a particularly large and aggressive figure, smashed through the makeshift barrier, clawing its way toward the group. "We're out of time," Mark yelled. "They're breaking through." Frank, still working on the signal, glanced over his shoulder. He knew that if the infected breached the rooftop, it would be over for all of them. Gritting his teeth, he made a decision. One he knew could cost him everything. "I'll hold them off," he said, stepping forward with a determined look. "Finish the signal and get everyone out of here." Daniel grabbed his arm, his eyes wide with shock. "Frank, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," Frank replied firmly. "If I don't, none of us make it out alive." Without waiting for a response, Frank turned and rushed toward the stairwell entrance. Using his pipe as a weapon, he fought with a ferocity born from years of experience and a deep sense of duty. He knew he couldn't win, but that wasn't the point. His goal was simple: buy enough time for the others to complete the signal and escape. "Go!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Don't stop until you're safe." As Daniel and the others watched, Frank held the line with everything he had. He fought bravely, his movements precise and deliberate, but it was clear that he couldn't hold out forever. Tears welled up in Lisa's eyes as she realized what was happening. He's sacrificing himself, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel clenched his fists, anger and grief mixing in his expression. We have to finish what he started. We owe him that much. With Frank holding off the infected, Mia and Daniel worked frantically to complete the signal. Sparks flew as they connected the final wires, and a faint hum indicated that the device was operational. "It's ready," Mia said, her voice shaking. From a mix of adrenaline and fear, Daniel grabbed the microphone attached to the device and began broadcasting. "This is a group of survivors trapped on the rooftop of Westside Mall. We're surrounded by infected and need immediate assistance. If anyone can hear this, please respond." For a moment, there was nothing but static. The group exchanged nervous glances, their hope fading with each passing second. Then, suddenly, a crackling voice came through the radio. "This is Captain Harris of the 22nd Rescue Unit. We read you loud and clear. Hold your position. We're en route." Its relief washed over the group like a tidal wave. They had done it. Help was on the way. Just as the radio transmission ended, Mia heard the faint voice again, the same voice she had heard earlier in the parking lot. Her heart raced as she turned toward the far side of the rooftop. There, huddled behind an air conditioning unit, was her younger brother, Jake. "Jake!" she cried, rushing toward him. Jake, no older than 10, looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Mia, I thought I'd never see you again." Mia knelt beside him, pulling him into a tight embrace. For a brief moment, the chaos around them faded, replaced by the overwhelming relief of being reunited. But the moment didn't last long. The infected were still closing in, and the sound of their growls grew louder with each passing second. "We have to go," Daniel called out. "The rescue team is on its way, but we need to get to the extraction point." Mia hesitated, glancing down at Jake. He looked pale and weak, and she noticed a faint bite mark on his arm. Her heart sank. "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No, this can't be happening." Daniel approached, his expression grim. He saw the bite and knew what it meant. "Mia, I'm so sorry." Mia shook her head, refusing to accept the reality of the situation. "There has to be something we can do. He's just a kid. I can't lose him." Jake, sensing his sister's distress, looked up at her with innocent eyes. "It's okay, Mia. I'll be okay. You just have to go." Mia's mind raced as she tried to think of a solution, but deep down, she knew there wasn't one. If they stayed, they would all die. If they left Jake behind, he would turn. It was an impossible choice, one no one should ever have to make. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "We have to move. If we don't, Frank's sacrifice will have been for nothing." Tears streaming down her face, Mia hugged Jake tightly one last time. "I love you, Jake. Always." "I love you too," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. With one final look, Mia stood and joined the others. As they made their way toward the extraction point, she forced herself to keep moving, each step more painful than the last. Minutes later, the sound of helicopter blades filled the air. The rescue team had arrived, and soldiers rappelled down to the rooftop, providing cover as the survivors were lifted to safety. As they rose into the air, Mia looked down at the mall below, now overrun by the infected. The place that had once been a symbol of normal life was now a haunting reminder of how much the world had changed. She clutched her metal rod tightly, vowing silently to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for those they had lost along the way. As dawn broke over the once bustling Westside Mall, The faint hum of helicopters filled the air. After hours of chaos and despair, the U.S. Army had finally intervened. Soldiers descended from the choppers with precision, their tactical maneuvers honed from years of training. Equipped with tear gas and advanced weaponry, they moved swiftly through the mall's main entrances, breaching barricades and neutralizing clusters of infected with ruthless efficiency. The survivors watched from the rooftop, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over them. They had made it through the night, scarred but alive. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of hope. The soldiers moved in organized formations, covering every section of the mall. Tear gas canisters were deployed to disorient large groups of infected, allowing the teams to secure key areas. From the rooftop, the survivors could see flashes of light and hear the muffled sounds of gunfire below. "They're clearing the building," Daniel said, his voice hoarse from hours of stress. "It's over." Frank's absence hung heavily over the group. He had given his life so they could make it to this moment, and while they had survived, it didn't feel like a complete victory. Still, they knew he would have wanted them to keep moving forward. Within minutes, the soldiers reached the rooftop and escorted the survivors to safety. As they were loaded onto the waiting helicopters, a medic began checking them for injuries. Mia sat quietly, clutching a photo of her brother that she had kept in her pocket. She didn't say a word, but her eyes reflected a mix of grief and determination. By midday, news of the rescue had spread across the country. The governor, addressing the nation in a live broadcast, pledged immediate support for those affected. Flanked by officials, he spoke with a solemn expression. "We are facing an unprecedented crisis, but we will not face it alone. Our first responders, the military and local communities have shown incredible bravery in the face of this outbreak. Evacuation protocols are being established, and resources will be allocated to ensure the safety of every citizen. Together, we will rebuild and we will endure." His words offered a sense of calm in the wake of chaos. Though the road ahead would be difficult, there was a collective determination to face it together. News helicopters circled above the mall, broadcasting live footage of the rescue operation. The images showed soldiers escorting survivors out of the building, the once vibrant mall now eerily silent in the background. Reporters on the ground described the scene with a mix of awe and empathy. After a harrowing night trapped inside the West Side Mall, a group of brave survivors has been rescued thanks to the coordinated efforts of local authorities and the U.S. Army. While the mall remains a symbol of terror, today's rescue serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope prevails. Across the country, viewers tuned in, inspired by the bravery of the survivors and the tireless work of those who came to their aid. The story sparked a wave of support, with volunteers gathering supplies and donations to assist those displaced by the outbreak. Outside the mall, a group of civilians had set up a makeshift triage to provide immediate aid to the rescued survivors. Medical tents were erected, offering water, food, and basic medical care. Volunteers moved quickly, tending to the injured and comforting those who had been reunited with their loved ones. Daniel, Lisa, Mark, and Mia sat together in one of the tents, each lost in their own thoughts. The events of the night had changed them forever. But for now, they were safe. "You made it," a volunteer said, handing them bottles of water. "You're heroes." Daniel shook his head. "We're just survivors. The real heroes are the ones who didn't make it." Mia remained quiet, her thoughts still on her brother. Though she had made it out alive, the pain of her loss was fresh, and it would take time to heal. Still, she knew that she had a purpose, to honor those who had been lost, and to keep fighting for a better future. As the survivors watched from a distance, soldiers worked to seal off the mall. Heavy metal gates were lowered, and warning signs were posted around the perimeter. The once vibrant center of commerce and community was now a quarantine zone, a stark reminder of what had been lost. Despite the sadness that hung in the air, there was also a sense of hope. The survivors had endured the unimaginable and lived to tell the tale. They had faced fear, loss, and danger, but they had also discovered resilience, courage, and the power of unity. Daniel turned to the group, his voice steady. "We've been through hell, but we made it, and we'll keep going. For Frank, for everyone who didn't make it." Mia nodded, clutching her brother's photo tightly. "We keep fighting. We keep surviving." If you want to hear how these survivors rebuild their lives, stay tuned. Like, subscribe, and join us tomorrow as we uncover the next chapter of survival in a world gone mad. And remember, every story matters, including yours. Together, we'll find a way forward. What would you do if you were trapped in a mall during a zombie apocalypse? Share your survival strategies in the comments below. You never know. Your ideas might just save a life someday. And if you've listened to this radio broadcast all the way to the end, thank you so much for your support. Don't forget to show your love by subscribing to our channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you tomorrow with another brand new radio broadcast. Stay